At 38,000 feet, the unthinkable happened. Flight 842 began to plummet from the sky as passengers recorded final goodbyes. The flight crew knew the truth. Their emergency protocols were failing. This was unsurvivable. But then, from row 9, a woman stood up. The same woman whose warnings had been silenced 15 years ago. The same woman who had been destroyed for trying to prevent this exact scenario. When she forced her way into the cockpit, what happened next left the entire world in awe. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story of an unsung hero moved you, consider subscribing for more extraordinary true stories of courage that changed everything. The delay announcement for Flight 842 to Tokyo flashed across the screens at O'Hare's International Terminal. Minor maintenance issues, the update read, causing collective groans from the waiting passengers. Serena Yarlith remained seated, unmoved by the commotion. At 48, she had the kind of face people's eyes slid past, unremarkable by design in her simple clothes and thick-rimmed glasses. The worn leather journal in her lap was filled with intricate diagrams and calculations, her fingers moving across the pages with practiced precision. Above her, a news segment played on the terminal television. Airline industry insiders report another round of cost-cutting measures affecting maintenance protocols, the anchor announced. Critics question whether these cuts compromise passenger safety. Serena's hand trembled slightly, the only indication that the report had affected her. She made another notation, her pen pressing harder into the paper. First time flying with us? She looked up to find a young flight attendant, Daxton according to his name tag, smiling down at her with the particular condescension reserved for those perceived to be nervous flyers. No, Serena replied quietly. I've been with this aircraft for longer than you know. Confusion flickered across his face before he defaulted to his customer service smile. Well, we're boarding now. Row 9, right? You'll be one of our first to board. As passengers filed onto the plane, Serena hesitated at the threshold, her eyes scanning the fuselage with expert assessment. Her fingers traced a nearly invisible seam along the doorway, a modification point only someone intimately familiar with the aircraft's design would recognize. Settling into her middle seat in row 9, Serena found herself between two businessmen who barely acknowledged her existence as they argued across her about quarterly projections. She didn't mind. Invisibility had become her comfort zone in the 15 years since she'd left the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, came Captain Renwick's voice over the intercom, we've been cleared for takeoff despite the minor hydraulic irregularity detected earlier. Our maintenance team has assured us everything is within operational parameters. Serena's eyes narrowed as she pulled out the safety card from the seat pocket, comparing its schematic to something in her notebook. Outside the window, a ground crew member watched the plane with unusual intensity as it began to taxi. The sensation of liftoff always triggered the same memory for Serena, presenting her innovative hydraulic backup system to the board of Meridian Airlines 15 years ago. She had been passionate, precise, confident in the importance of her design. Your redundancy system adds $17 million per aircraft, the CEO had said, sliding her proposal back across the table. The statistical probability of complete hydraulic failure is so remote that we cannot justify the expenditure to our shareholders. But when it does happen, there will be no recovery possible without this system, she had countered. The board has made its decision, he'd replied with finality. We'll remove it from production models. She'd thought that would be the end of it, a rejected proposal, nothing more. She hadn't anticipated what would follow when she took her concerns public. The plane leveled at cruising altitude, and Serena returned to her calculations. She wasn't an engineer anymore, at least not officially. The industry had seen to that after her whistleblowing, but she still kept current with aviation technology, studying every modification, every accident report, every near miss. An hour into the flight, the first shudder ran through the aircraft. Most passengers didn't notice, attributing it to routine turbulence. But Serena recognized it immediately, the distinctive vibration pattern of a hydraulic pressure anomaly in the primary system. She checked her watch and made a notation in her journal. Hydraulic systems didn't fail suddenly. They degraded in predictable patterns if you knew how to interpret the signs, and Serena knew better than anyone. 20 minutes later, the cabin lights flickered. A subtle change in the engine pitch followed. imperceptible to most. But to Serena, it might as well have been an alarm bell. She closed her journal and stowed it in her bag, then methodically checked that her seatbelt was secure. The businessman beside her finally noticed her. "Nervous flyer?" he asked with mild amusement. "No," she answered. "Just prepared." Seconds later, the plane lurched violently to the left. Overhead compartments burst open, sending luggage tumbling into the aisle. The cabin filled with the sound of alarms and frightened voices as oxygen masks dangled from the ceiling panels. "Remain calm and secure your oxygen masks," instructed Zaira, the head flight attendant, her practiced composure betrayed by the tremor in her voice. She exchanged a look with her colleagues that communicated what they wouldn't say aloud. This was beyond their training. In the cockpit, Captain Renwick and First Officer Lachlan worked frantically through emergency checklists. "Primary hydraulics completely gone," Lachlan reported, his voice tight. "Initiating secondary systems," Renwick responded, hands moving across the controls with practiced efficiency. Nothing happened. Secondary hydraulics unresponsive. They shared a look that acknowledged the unthinkable. They were running out of options and altitude. Throughout the cabin, passengers began filming tearful goodbyes on their phones. A mother clutched her child. An elderly couple held hands with resigned dignity. In row 9, Serena remained eerily calm, her journal open as she analyzed the aircraft's movements and sounds like reading a familiar language. The specific pitch of the failing engine, the way the plane listed to port, these were signatures she recognized intimately. "Are you some kind of engineer?" asked the businessman beside her, noticing her calculations. "I used to be," she replied, her mind flashing back to the aftermath of her whistleblowing. The industry had closed ranks against her, labeled as unstable, attention-seeking, technically unsound. Her former colleagues avoided eye contact at conferences. Job applications went unanswered. The narrative became that she was a disgruntled employee spreading misinformation that would damage public trust in air travel. Within a year, she had been effectively blacklisted from every major aerospace company. Her expertise, 15 years of cutting-edge hydraulic systems design, rendered worthless by a coordinated campaign to discredit her. Captain Renwick's voice came over the intercom, noticeably strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a significant hydraulic failure. We're implementing emergency procedures and diverting to Anchorage. Please follow all crew instructions." What he didn't say, what Serena knew from the specific vibration pattern now rattling through the airframe, was that the standard emergency procedures would fail. The plane had perhaps 5 minutes before complete loss of control. She checked her watch, made a final calculation in her notebook, and stood up. "Ma'am, you need to remain seated with your seatbelt fastened," Zaira said, hurrying toward her. Serena moved with unexpected purpose toward the cockpit. "There's a tertiary hydraulic bypass that can be manually activated," she stated calmly. "It's not in your manual because they removed it from production models, but not from the prototype, and this is the prototype." "Security breach. Passenger attempting to access the cockpit," Zaira called into her radio, attempting to block Serena's path. Serena looked directly into Zaira's eyes. "In approximately 90 seconds, this aircraft will enter an unrecoverable descent. I can prevent that, but only if you let me through right now." Something in her calm certainty made Zaira hesitate. Before she could decide, the plane dropped suddenly, throwing everyone against the ceiling before gravity slammed them back down. Screams filled the cabin. "How do you know this is the prototype?" Zaira demanded, struggling to regain her footing. "Because I built it," Serena replied. "My name is Dr. Serena Yarlith. I designed the hydraulic systems for this entire fleet, including the emergency protocol they decided was too expensive to implement." Recognition dawned in Zaira's eyes. The whistleblower, the one who claimed corners were being cut. "The one who was right," Serena corrected, her voice steady even as the plane shuddered violently around them. "Now, are you going to let those people die to follow protocol, or are you going to let me save them?" The cockpit door opened to chaos. Warning lights illuminated every panel as Renwick and Lachlan fought a losing battle with the failing aircraft. "Who the hell?" Captain Renwick began, turning to see Serena enter unauthorized. "I'm Dr. Serena Yarlith," she stated with quiet authority. "I designed this aircraft's hydraulic systems, including the emergency protocol they told you to remove from the final design. You have exactly 93 seconds before we lose all control." The cockpit fell silent. First Officer Lachlan's eyes widened in recognition. "You're the Yarlith?" The whistleblower? 15 years ago, Serena had testified before aviation authorities about critical safety systems being removed to cut costs. She'd been discredited, her career destroyed by the same companies she'd tried to hold accountable. The auxiliary panel behind the circuit breaker housing, she directed, already moving toward it. It shouldn't exist according to your manuals, but I built it into the prototype before they could stop me. Captain Renwick hesitated only momentarily before nodding. Do it. Passengers' phones captured the remarkable scene as Serena bypassed the main console and accessed a hidden panel. Her fingers moved with practiced certainty across controls that, officially, didn't exist. She executed a complex sequence, activating a safety system she had secretly embedded in the aircraft's architecture years ago. The violent shuddering of the plane gradually subsided. The nose began to level out. It's stabilizing, Lachlan whispered in disbelief. How did you know this would happen? Because I warned them 15 years ago, Serena replied, checking indicators that confirmed her system was functioning. This exact failure, this exact scenario. They said the odds were too low to justify the cost. They fired you for this? Renwick asked, understanding dawning on his face. They did more than fire me, Serena said quietly. They made sure I never worked in aviation again. Through the cockpit window, the vast expanse of the Alaskan coastline came into view. They weren't out of danger yet. The bypass system was temporary, designed to give them just enough control to attempt a landing. Anchorage Tower, this is Meridian 842 declaring an emergency, Renwick radioed. Multiple hydraulic failures operating on auxiliary systems, requesting immediate clearance to land and full emergency response. As Renwick handled communications, Serena continued monitoring the makeshift system she'd created years ago, a system that existed only in this single aircraft, a prototype that by sheer coincidence or fate had ended up carrying her on the day its hidden features would be needed. Why this plane? Lachlan asked, voicing the question that hung in the air. What are the odds you'd be on the exact aircraft you designed? Serena's lips curved in the barest hint of a smile. I've been tracking this airframe for 15 years. I take this flight twice annually to inspect it. The company doesn't know. They'd never recognize me now. Renwick stared at her. You've been maintaining your system secretly all this time. Someone had to, she replied simply. I knew this day would come. 20 minutes later, Flight 842 made a rough but controlled landing at Anchorage International Airport. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft as passengers disembarked, many still filming the remarkable scene on their phones. By the time the airline CEO arrived, claiming the successful emergency landing was due to our rigorous safety protocols, videos of Serena explaining the company's deliberate removal of her safety system had already gone viral. Journalists swarmed the terminal, piecing together the story of the whistleblower engineer who had sacrificed her career to install safety features the company had refused to implement, features that had just saved 211 lives. As Serena finally exited the plane, the flight crew formed an impromptu honor guard. Captain Renwick removed his wings pin and placed it on her lapel in a gesture of profound respect. The skies are safer because you refused to stay silent, he said. Serena accepted the pin with quiet dignity. For 15 years, she had been vilified, her expertise questioned, her motives impugned. Now, in the space of a few hours, her vindication had come in the most dramatic way possible. A young reporter pushed through the crowd, microphone extended. Dr. Yarlith, how does it feel to be proven right after all these years? Before she could answer, a familiar voice cut through the commotion. Dr. Yarlith will not be making any statements at this time. Ellery Voss, Meridian Airlines' chief legal officer, strode toward them, flanked by security personnel. His expression was professionally neutral, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his anger. Miss Yarlith is a former employee who interfered with flight operations, potentially endangering passengers, Voss announced to the gathered media. While we appreciate her assistance during this anomalous situation, we must emphasize that proper protocols were already in place. Serena met his gaze steadily. The proper protocols were failing, Mr. Voss. As I warned your board, they would 15 years ago. The assembled passengers, hearing this exchange, began to murmur angrily. Someone shouted, "She saved our lives when your protocols failed." Sensing the turning tide of public opinion, Voss lowered his voice. "This doesn't change anything, Serena. The non-disclosure agreement you signed when you left was invalidated the moment you chose profit over passenger safety, she finished for him. I have the calculations, the original designs, and the board meeting minutes where your executives explicitly rejected safety measures because they were too expensive. She nodded toward the passengers still filming the confrontation. And now, I have witnesses. Voss's professional veneer cracked. You'll never work in this industry again. I haven't for 15 years, Serena replied calmly. What more can you take from me? A passenger stepped forward, the businessman who had sat beside Serena in row 9. I'm Thaddeus Quill, senior partner at Quill, Bryce, and Harrow, he said, handing Serena his business card. My firm specializes in corporate whistleblower cases. I believe we have much to discuss, Dr. Yarlith. Voss paled, recognizing one of the country's most prominent attorneys. He retreated, muttering about company statements and further investigation. As the crowd dispersed, Serena found herself approached by Captain Renwick and First Officer Lachlan. What you did up there, Renwick began, his voice thick with emotion. I've been flying for 23 years, never seen anything like it. The company will try to bury this, Lachlan warned. They always do. Serena looked toward the terminal where airline officials were already huddling, no doubt crafting their damage control strategy. Not this time. There are too many witnesses, too much evidence. What evidence? Renwick asked. Serena patted her bag containing the worn journal. 15 years of documentation. Every flight this aircraft has taken, every maintenance record, every anomaly, and the original designs they claimed never existed. Lachlan's eyes widened. You've been tracking this plane all this time. This plane and the 4 other prototypes, Serena confirmed. I installed similar bypass systems in all of them before I was terminated. The company never found them because they weren't looking for them. That's why you were on this flight, Renwick realized. You knew. I suspected, Serena corrected. The maintenance logs showed early signs of hydraulic degradation. When I heard about the minor issues before takeoff, I calculated we had approximately a 78% chance of complete system failure during this flight. And you got on anyway? Lachlan asked incredulously. Serena's expression softened. Someone had to be there when it happened. As they spoke, a crowd began to gather around them. Passengers who had been on the flight approached cautiously, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and awe. My daughter is 6, said a woman, her eyes still red from crying. Because of you, she still has a mother. One by one, the passengers came forward, sharing similar sentiments. A college student returning home, a grandfather who had almost missed his granddaughter's birth, a newlywed couple. All lives that would have ended if not for Serena's foresight and courage. What had begun as a crowd became something more meaningful, a living testament to the impact of one person's refusal to compromise their principles, even when it cost them everything. As night fell over Anchorage, the story of Flight 842 dominated news cycles worldwide. Aviation experts analyzed the incident, many openly questioning the airline industry's safety practices. Former colleagues of Serena's came forward, admitting they had known she was right but had remained silent to protect their careers. In a hotel room provided by Thaddeus Quill's law firm, Serena watched the coverage with a strange detachment. For 15 years, she had lived with the knowledge that she had been right, that lives were at risk, and that no one with the power to change things would listen. Now, vindication had come, but it brought her no joy, only relief that the passengers and crew had survived. Her phone rang continuously with interview requests from major networks. Publishers offered book deals. A prominent university extended an invitation to join their aerospace engineering faculty. 15 years of silence and obscurity were ending in a deluge of attention she had never sought. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Zaira, the head flight attendant, standing in the hallway. May I come in? Zaira asked. Serena stepped aside, allowing her to enter. I wanted to apologize, Zaira said without preamble. When you tried to get to the cockpit, I almost stopped you. Her voice broke. You were following protocol, Serena assured her. You had no reason to trust me. But I should have, Zaira insisted. The way you spoke, the certainty in your voice. I've been flying for 12 years, and I've never met anyone who understood an aircraft the way you do. She handed Serena a thumb drive. The cabin footage from our security cameras. The airline has already requested we turn it over so they can control the narrative. I made a copy first. Serena accepted it, understanding the risk Zaira had taken. Why? Because truth matters, Zaira said simply. And because my mother was a whistleblower too, in the pharmaceutical industry. They destroyed her just like they tried to destroy you. I grew up watching what happens when corporations value profit over people's lives. The next morning, as Serena prepared for her first meeting with Quill's legal team, her phone alerted her to breaking news. The airline had issued a statement acknowledging procedural oversights in the implementation of certain safety recommendations and announcing an internal review. It was corporate speak for admitting fault without admitting fault, a carefully crafted non-apology designed to minimize legal exposure while appearing responsive to public concern. What they hadn't anticipated was the response from the aviation community. Pilots, engineers, and mechanics from across the industry began sharing their own stories of safety concerns ignored, corners cut, whistleblowers silenced. By noon, the FAA had announced a formal investigation into Meridian Airlines' safety practices. By evening, the company's stock had fallen 17%. Serena watched these developments with growing resolve. The fight ahead would be difficult. Corporations like Meridian had vast resources and powerful connections, but for the first time in 15 years, she wasn't fighting alone. 6 days after the emergency landing, Serena found herself preparing to testify before a hastily convened congressional subcommittee on aviation safety. The hearing room was packed with journalists, industry representatives, and members of the public. As she waited to be called, she noticed a familiar face, Daxton, the young flight attendant who had condescendingly asked if she was a first-time flyer. "Dr. Yarlith," he said, approaching her with obvious discomfort. "I wanted to apologize for how I spoke to you at the gate. If I had any idea who you were—" "You couldn't have known," she interrupted gently. "That's just it," he said, his voice dropping. "We should have known. Your story should have been part of our training. Instead, they erased you from the company's history." Before she could respond, the committee chairman called the hearing to order. Serena took her place at the witness table, facing the panel of legislators who would now hear the truth she had been trying to tell for 15 years. "Dr. Yarlith," began the chairwoman, "you've submitted extensive documentation regarding your role in designing hydraulic systems for Meridian Airlines, as well as evidence of your warnings about potential catastrophic failures. Would you please explain to the committee why you believe your concerns were dismissed?" Serena leaned toward the microphone. The room fell silent. "It wasn't a matter of engineering," she said clearly. "It was a matter of economics. My safety system would have added approximately 4% to the production cost of each aircraft. The company determined that the statistical probability of total hydraulic failure did not justify the expenditure. And yet, such a failure occurred on Flight 842, the chairwoman noted. "Yes," Serena confirmed, "exactly as I had predicted it would, under precisely the conditions I had outlined in my reports to the board 15 years ago." A congressman leaned forward. "Dr. Yarlith, are you suggesting that Meridian Airlines knowingly put passengers at risk to increase their profit margin?" Serena met his gaze steadily. "I am not suggesting it, Congressman. I am stating it as fact, supported by documentation, witness testimony, and the events of Flight 842. The hearing continued for hours, with Serena methodically laying out her case. She presented the original designs, the board meeting minutes, the maintenance records she had secretly tracked for 15 years. She explained how she had installed the bypass system in the prototype aircraft without authorization, knowing it would someday be needed. "Some might call that sabotage," noted one skeptical legislator. "I call it conscience," Serena replied. "I took an oath as an engineer to hold paramount the safety and welfare of the public. When my employer chose to disregard that principle, I had a moral obligation to act." As the hearing concluded, the chairwoman addressed Serena directly. "Dr. Yarlith, 15 years ago, you sacrificed your career to protect people you would never meet. Last week, because of that sacrifice, 211 people returned to their families. On behalf of this committee and the American people, I thank you for your extraordinary courage." Outside the hearing room, reporters clamored for comments. Industry executives hurried past, avoiding eye contact. And ordinary citizens, many of them passengers from Flight 842, waited to express their gratitude to the woman who had refused to be silenced. In the months that followed the congressional hearing, The ripple effects of Flight 842 transformed the aviation industry. The FAA implemented comprehensive reviews of safety protocols across all major airlines. Engineers who had previously remained silent about safety concerns came forward, protected by new whistleblower legislation drafted in direct response to Serena's testimony. Meridian Airlines faced record fines and a complete restructuring of its executive leadership. The CEO and board members who had dismissed Serena's warnings 15 years earlier resigned in disgrace, their legacies permanently tarnished. For Serena, vindication came with unexpected challenges. After years of invisibility, she now found herself thrust into the spotlight as the face of corporate accountability. Interview requests continued to flood in. She received job offers from prestigious universities and competing airlines. A prominent publisher proposed a substantial advance for her memoir. She accepted none of them. Instead, she focused on working with Thaddeus Quill to establish the Yarlath Foundation for Engineering Ethics, funded by the settlement she received from Meridian Airlines. The foundation would provide legal and financial support to engineers and technical professionals who identified safety issues in their industries. The problem wasn't just Meridian, she explained to Quill as they finalized the foundation's charter. It's systemic across industries where safety competes with profit. And you think this foundation will change that? Quill asked, not skeptically but with genuine curiosity. I think it will give people a choice, Serena replied. When I stood up 15 years ago, I stood alone. The foundation ensures no one else has to. On a crisp autumn morning 6 months after the emergency landing, Serena received an unexpected visitor at her modest apartment in Chicago. Captain Renwick stood at her door, still in his uniform, having apparently come directly from a flight. "May I come in?" he asked. Serena welcomed him, curious about the purpose of his visit. "I've been promoted," Renwick announced without preamble. "Director of Flight Safety for the entire airline. The board has given me broad authority to implement reforms." "Congratulations," Serena said sincerely. "They made a good choice." "I want you on my team," Renwick said, "as Chief Engineer for Safety Systems. Full autonomy, direct reporting line to me, no interference from the bean counters." Serena looked at him skeptically. "Why would the airline that destroyed my career want me back?" "Because they're terrified," Renwick said frankly. "The stock is still down 30%. Passenger numbers have plummeted. The only way forward is to convince the public they've changed, and hiring you is the most convincing proof they could offer. So I'd be a public relations move." "Initially, yes," Renwick admitted. "But once you're inside, you'd have the power to implement every safety measure you've advocated for. The tertiary hydraulic bypass system you created, it would become standard on every aircraft in the fleet." Serena was silent for a long moment. "I need to think about it." "Of course," Renwick said, rising to leave. At the door, he turned back. "For what it's worth, I believe you could save more lives from inside the system than outside it." After he left, Serena sat alone with her thoughts. The offer was tempting, a chance to implement the very safety systems she had fought for, to directly influence the industry that had once rejected her. But could she trust them? Or would they use her presence to rehabilitate their image while subtly undermining her authority? Her contemplation was interrupted by another visitor, Zaira, the flight attendant who had given her the security footage. "I heard about Renwick's offer," Zaira said after they'd exchanged greetings. "News travels fast in the company." "What do you think I should do?" Serena asked. "I think," Zaira said carefully, "that the company hired consultants to tell them how to recover from this crisis, and those consultants said hiring you was step one. I also think that once the crisis fades from public memory, they'll start pressuring you to compromise, just like they did before." Serena nodded. It aligned with her own suspicions. "But," Zaira continued, "I also think that hundreds of people are alive because you were stubborn enough to install that system when no one was looking. If you were inside, with real authority this time, imagine what you could accomplish." Their conversation stayed with Serena as she weighed her decision over the following days. The question wasn't just about her personal vindication. It was about where she could make the greatest impact on aviation safety. On the morning she was scheduled to give Renwick her answer, Serena's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Dr. Yarlath, this is Professor Halloran from the National Transportation Safety Board. We've reviewed your congressional testimony and your design work extensively." The board would like to offer you a position as special advisor on aviation safety systems. The offer changed everything. Unlike the airline position, which would limit her influence to a single company, the NTSB role would allow her to shape safety standards across the entire industry. When she met with Renwick later that day, she declined his offer as graciously as possible. "I understand," he said, disappointed but not surprised. "The NTSB is a better platform for the changes you want to make." "It's not about platforms," Serena corrected gently. "It's about trust. The airline destroyed that 15 years ago. It can't be rebuilt with a job title." 6 weeks later, Serena stood before her first class of graduate engineering students at Northwestern University. In addition to her NTSB role, she had accepted an adjunct professorship teaching a newly created course on ethics in engineering. "Engineering is not just about making things work," she told the attentive students. "It's about making them work safely, even when economic pressures push in the opposite direction. It's about having the courage to stand by your calculations when others try to dismiss them as too conservative or too costly." She moved to the whiteboard and wrote 3 questions. What do you do when your analysis shows a safety risk, but implementing the solution will be expensive? What do you do when supervisors pressure you to sign off on a design you know is flawed? What do you do when speaking up might cost you your career? "These aren't theoretical questions," Serena said, turning back to face the class. "During your careers, many of you will face situations exactly like these. Your decisions in those moments will define not just your professional legacy, but potentially the lives of those who use what you build." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Dr. Yarlith, given what happened to you, would you make the same choice again, knowing it would cost 15 years of your career?" Serena considered the question carefully. "When I installed those bypass systems without authorization, I violated company policy. I took a risk that could have ended with criminal charges, not just termination. But I knew the math was right. I knew someday, somewhere, a plane would experience exactly the failure I had predicted." She paused, meeting the eyes of her students. "I didn't know I would be on that plane. I didn't know I would be the one to activate the system. But I knew someone's life would depend on it. So yes, I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." As winter turned to spring, Serena settled into her new roles. Her days were divided between teaching, consulting for the NTSB, and guiding the Yarlith Foundation. Her work was demanding but fulfilling in a way her earlier career had never been. On the anniversary of Flight 842, she received an invitation to a gathering organized by the passengers and crew. They had formed a tight-knit community bonded by their shared experience, meeting regularly to process the trauma and celebrate their survival. Serena had declined previous invitations, uncomfortable with being treated as a hero. But something about the 1-year milestone made her reconsider. Perhaps it was time to find closure, not just for them, but for herself as well. The event was held in a hotel ballroom in Chicago. As Serena entered, conversation gradually fell silent. Then someone began to applaud, and within moments, the entire room joined in. Captain Renwick approached with a smile. "We weren't sure you'd come." "Neither was I," Serena admitted. He guided her through the crowd, introducing her to passengers whose names and faces she had memorized from the flight manifest during her years of monitoring the aircraft. They shared stories of the past year, marriages, births, graduations, all the moments that would never have happened without her intervention. Near the end of the evening, Renwick called for everyone's attention. "A year ago today, we all thought we were living our last moments. Thanks to one person's courage and foresight, we're here to celebrate instead." He unveiled a plaque bearing Serena's name, along with the words, "For unwavering dedication to the highest principles of engineering ethics and human safety." "This will be installed on the wall of every Meridian training facility," Renwick announced. "Every new pilot, engineer, and crew member will learn your story as part of their training." Serena accepted the honor with characteristic humility. When it was her turn to speak, she kept her remarks brief. "I didn't do what I did for recognition," she said. "I did it because it was right. The mathematical probability of catastrophic failure was low, but the cost of that failure was unacceptably high. That equation has only one ethical solution. As she looked out at the faces of those who had been on Flight 842, Serena felt a sense of completion. For 15 years, she had carried the burden of knowledge that people were flying in aircraft with potentially fatal flaws, that her warnings had been ignored, that her career had been sacrificed for nothing. Now, that burden was lifted. The systems she had designed were being implemented across the industry. The ethical principles she had upheld at such personal cost were being taught to a new generation of engineers. The people whose lives she had saved were moving forward with their own stories. 2 weeks after the anniversary gathering, Serena received a letter from a name she didn't recognize. Inside was a child's drawing of an airplane with a stick figure standing beside it. The accompanying note read, "Dear Dr. Yarlith, my name is Imogen. I'm 9 years old. My mom was on your airplane. She told me what you did and how you saved her when everyone else thought it was impossible. I want to be an engineer like you when I grow up. Mom says you teach at a university now. Do you think someday I could take your class? Sincerely, Imogen Walsh." Serena carefully placed the drawing on her desk, next to her worn journal and Captain Renwick's wings pin. She took out a sheet of her personal stationery and began to write. "Dear Imogen, thank you for your wonderful drawing. Your mother was very brave during our flight together, and I'm sure she's very proud of you. Engineering is a challenging and rewarding path. It requires strong math skills, creative thinking, and most importantly, the courage to stand by what you know is right, even when others disagree. If you decide to pursue engineering, I would be honored to have you in my class someday. But whatever path you choose, remember that the most important calculations we make in life aren't about numbers. They're about the value of human life and the responsibility we have to protect it. In the meantime, I've enclosed some books about engineering that I think you might enjoy. Keep drawing, keep asking questions, and keep imagining the things you might build someday. Sincerely, Dr. Serena Yarlith." As she sealed the envelope, Serena reflected on how differently her story might have ended if she hadn't been on that particular flight, if she hadn't maintained her secret monitoring of the prototype aircraft, if she hadn't had the courage to stand up when all hope seemed lost. Small choices, accumulating over 15 years, had led to a moment where everything changed, not just for the passengers and crew of Flight 842, but for an entire industry. From her window, Serena could see the Northwestern University campus, where her students were learning the technical skills they would need as engineers. But more importantly, they were learning the ethical framework that would guide their decisions when those skills were tested. That, she decided, was the legacy that mattered most. Not the plaques or the recognition or even the lives saved on a single flight, but the ripples those actions would send through time, influencing decisions not yet made by engineers, not yet trained to face challenges, not yet imagined.